Let no grudge be forgotten, and no score go unsettled. Clan Angrund is ready for vengeance, and headed to retake their ancestral hold of Carrick Eight Peaks under the leadership of Belegar Ironhammer. Angry and embittered by his losses, the proud Dawi Lord is backed by spectral dwarf ancestors, unique ethereal heroes exclusive to Clan Angrund. A stout melee fighter, he brings with him the siege attacker trait, as well as improved leadership while besieging his foes, the ability to recruit early rangers, and the access to unique buildings once Carrick 8 Peaks is retaken. All of this comes at the cost of a debilitating 50% increased upkeep for all forces, and an ancestral grudge that will persist until the ancient dwarf realm is retaken. With a starting roster of hammerers, dwarf warriors, and rangers, his army is a small elite kindred that should never be taken lightly, persevering through all struggles. So let us step into the boots of Lord Revenge Incarnate and strike out the greatest grudge. So hello everybody, here we are in the vaults starting a Clan Angrund campaign. First and foremost, full disclaimer, I am playing this on legendary and very hard difficulties, so that is what the difficulty is, and that's basically what my experience here is based on. So all things I say here should apply to lower difficulties, but some things may be less important to prioritize simply because you have less issues with control and morale at lower difficulties. Otherwise, this is arguably the hardest campaign in the game, or almost certainly the hardest campaign in the game, available through the King and the Warlord DLC, alongside the Scarsnick's Moon campaign. I will not be going over the general ways to play dwarves. This is largely for people who already have some experience with dwarves or already know how to play dwarves. If you're not entirely sure how to play dwarves and you want to pick up Angrund, I would recommend first going over my looking at my dwarf guide, where I cover more general stuff like each specific hero, each specific hero type, the lord types, army comps, and tech prioritization, that sort of stuff with dwarves. With Angrund, I'll simply be going over the specifics of playing Angrund and taking Carrick 8 Peaks as quickly as possible, and going over some of their small nuanced differences from dwarves, as well as the big ones, big glaring ones. So, with that, and once again, if you have any questions about dwarves, general dwarves, that aren't answered here, be sure to check out the dwarf video. Otherwise, always you can ask in the comments. So first and foremost, the pros. They have full access to the dwarf unit roster, full access to dwarf tech, full access to dwarf economy, all of which are very powerful. And in fact, their dwarf unit roster is arguably better because they get early access to rangers, and Belegar having the same army or battle effect skills tree as a rune lord has some very significant ranger upgrades, including reduced upkeep, greater ammunition, and far superior damage. So that makes the early access to rangers very, very strong. So definitely a big buff right off the bat there. Are definitely one of the big pro there. Their economy, once again, very strong. They don't get access to early diamond mines, but then again, they do get access to the ale stores, which have crazy buffs to trade with the dwarf beer resource. They can improve public order, they'll improve growth. They're very general purpose, strong, and fairly cheap income building. So definitely something to look out for. There are a handful of these sorts of buildings scattered throughout various dwarf territories. Furthermore, while their start position isn't good for most reasons, or for most purposes, you do have fairly easy access to trade because you're surrounded by a lot of different nations, and you have fairly easy access to confederation because with Carrick Hearn and Carrick Nor nearby, and they will sometimes find themselves in enough trouble to where they will confederate with you. Belegar, of course, we've discussed the improvements to his rangers, but he also has very strong siege abilities. He himself has siege attacker, and he also has Wallmaster, which reduces enemy siege holdout time by 5 and increases their attrition they take by 15% when you lay siege. This means you can, especially small garrison or small settlements, you can siege down incredibly quickly as Belegar. Makes him an incredibly powerful lord in that, from a siege sense. Finally, you have access to dwarf ancestors. This gives you early heroes, potentially improves your tech research because if you decide to rush for Inquiring Mind. And even if you don't rush for it, I would recommend going for it ultimately, because 10% research improvement, especially when stacked from all these 4 heroes, is a very significant buff. And the heroes do cause terror. They are ethereal. They they're just a very powerful unit in general. So definitely, as you can see, very solid stats: melee attack, melee defense. Not terrible speed, solid weapon strength. They're just a very strong unit, and they're unbreakable, so they're just very strong units in general. And they can also be used to improve your growth if you spec into the runesmith, stalwart rune. And if you spec into the engineer, he starts off with a 10% bonus to reduction construction costs, and you can reduce it by another 10%. So definitely worthwhile with the engineer. You can make your buildings much cheaper. So those are the pros for Angrund, and there are definitely a few of them, but many of them are simply rooted in the fact that it's a dwarf faction. Its cons, in my opinion, much more significant and much more crippling, and definitely make this a hard campaign. So first and foremost, you're surrounded on all sides by your enemies, or potential enemies. Border Princes, Tilia, and Whistler are not guaranteed friends. Neither are the Wood Elves. And then Broken Nose, of course, starts right next to you. Skarsnik may come down. There are various savage orc tribes that are kind of wandering all over the place and can come from the north, the east, that sort of thing. There is both the Crooked Moon Mutiniskits and Karak Angzar orcs. I forget what this tribe is called, the Black Venom, who can come in from the east, and from the south you will often have to deal with beastmen. And that is, of course, without considering the fact that any of your surrounding neighbors, whether they be human or elf, decide to attack you. They can definitely cause you trouble, and this is a very indefensible province. Because it takes 3 turns to move from Karak Izor to Zraxil, so if you're being hit on all sides, it is very difficult to defend. That makes this one of the most diplomatic-heavy campaigns, in my opinion, in the game. Then you have the major elephant in the room, which is, of course, the issues surrounding the fact that you need to capture Karak 8 Beaks. First and foremost, you have a small grudge which will kick in, or a grudge which will kick in once you at turn 2, which will penalize you just like a normal grudge until you take Karak 8 Peaks. And then the other 8 peak related issue is 50% increased upkeep on all units until you take Karak 8 Peaks once again. And that is definitely a bit of a crippling thing. It is not comparable to Skarsnik's goblin limitation, because quite frankly Skarsnik's goblins are incredibly powerful and dirt cheap. Whereas, especially with all the various tech upgrades you can get, whereas Angrund is simply generic dwarves, and while that is strong, when they are 50% more expensive on units that are already fairly expensive, it can get pretty crazy. And it makes fielding things such as artillery very difficult because of how expensive they are. And obviously they have issues with keeping control, and not just keeping control, but also putting revolts down, because you aren't really able to field enough armies to cover all the flanks or all areas normally. And finally, there may be some issues with building up and preparing in time for chaos, because you will be fighting on a bit of you'll have a slowish development because of your sluggish economy due to that increased upkeep. Once you take Karak 8 Peaks, it's usually going to be about 40, 50, 60, 70 maybe turns into the game. So Chaos Invasion is going to be hitting shortly thereafter, and you have to scrape up defenses very quickly and somehow deal with that. And that can be a bit difficult. You might not have the ideal army comps. You might not have enough armor-piercing units like Thunders or Cannons or Longbeards. Those are armor-piercing, but those are usually your line holders. You might not have those available yet, and that can be a major issue for Clan Angrund. So those are the pros and cons there. Other cons, of course, same as dwarves. Generally cost the units, even without the penalty. Their growth is slow, replenishment is slow. Past tier 4, their units are not, for tier 4 and up, their units aren't that great, besides maybe the organ gun. And they don't have cavalry, so the same usual dwarf issues. So, without further ado, going straight into general early game. So early game, whether you're doing a rush or a slow build-up, you will want to take vaults. That's mandatory no matter what you do. So first turn, you should be using your Dwarf Engineer, moving him as far as you can, and using him to reduce costs of construction in Karak Izor. In Karak Izor, you have a few options of what you can do. If you do not feel comfortable scrapping your clan barracks, which I can understand if you're a bit newer to the game, you can build walls or an ale store and leave the sparring chamber up. And in the meantime, load up your Thanes, load up your Runesmith, use Underway, jump over by Karak Buftar, and on turn 2, take it. Turn 3, move south, and by turn 4, you should be able to take Zraxil. Perhaps you might not have enough movement, but you should be able to. With March, obviously, you go from Buftar to here, and then on turn 4, you take Zraxil. Your engineer will not be able to support you early on because if you deploy him here, but the reduced cost is well worth it, in my opinion, and well worth the fact that you won't quite get as many levels on him because he won't be in combat. It's an acceptable trade. Otherwise, if you really want to get levels on your engineer, you can underway or move your army over here, say, build up units a little bit, and throw the engineer in, then go for Carrick Buftar. And then finish the process normally, so it should be by turn 5 or 6 instead of turn 4 or 5. So if you don't feel comfortable taking out the barracks, be sure to build walls or build a ale store. And if you do feel comfortable taking down the barracks, which I often do this, I'll build about 2 dwarf warriors for Belegar's army, and then scrap the barracks and replace them with an ale store and a trinket maker, simply to increase your early game income. And once you level up Carrick Izor, you'll build walls. And then your 2 last slots are basically free options. And what you'll do is in Zaraxil and Carrick Buftar, if you're going along with this and scrapping early game racks, then in either Carrick Buftar or Zaraxil, you build a Ranger's Outpost. That is a tech building that for Clan Angrund, that gives you early access to Rangers, and because Rangers are so powerful for Clan Angrund, this is definitely the way you want to go. And then you can just crank out a bunch of Rangers once you want to build an army. And you don't want to immediately build armies with Belegar because they're so expensive to upkeep. So you can pay very badly if you build an army prematurely. So once you've taken all of Carrick Buftar, all of the vaults, follow the usual dwarf system of walls or economy building everywhere. Try to get perhaps the growth ability on your runesmith with Stalwart Rune, just to speed up your growth. The ale store, which is a good priority choice, will improve your growth. I would usually take this over the walls in early game, and tech up very quickly to tier 3 everywhere. Get walls up, get money up. If you moved the sparring chamber out, you can move it into one of your smaller settlements and build up your economy basically. And from there, as you're doing this, you have a few options. You will obviously have to defend at this stage. Often Skarsnik will be still fighting Carrick Norn, but there might be Crooked Moon Munisgit's army coming in from the south, and you will have to fight those off. Now, if you're doing a rush strat, my recommendation is to try to get good relationships with everybody. The dwarves, the Carrick Norn, of course, the Carrick Hearn, Border Princess, Tilia, Wissenland, Elves. Try to get good relations, at least non-aggression pacts. If possible, military access and trade. Still build up fortifications, build up income, all that stuff, of course, and just sit on a very small stack with Belegar, just to do the bare minimum of defending, and in the meantime, save money. And at around turn 30 to 40, you should have enough money to build a 20 stack on Belegar. This should probably start around turn 35, maybe 40. You start building a 20 stack. It really should be earlier, probably about 30 or 35. You start building a 20 stack on Belegar. You should have enough money saved up. If you play cautiously with your money, you build a 20 stack on Belegar, build a second stack that's either a 10 stack or 20 stack with a new lord, and then you dart straight across the map. Now, because it's earlier on, there will be a 20 stack in Carrick 8 Peaks next alongside a 12 to 14 man garrison, most likely, at this earlier stage. So a 20 and 10 stack should be adequate. If you're a little more worried, you can definitely do 20 and 15 or 20 and 20. You ignore all penalties, all loss of money. You will be losing a lot of money. You'll possibly be going into the phase where you're taking attrition. Ignore that. Move through either underway or encamp phases, or and use force or march as much as you can until you are taking attrition. And then you group your 2 armies up, and you take Carrick 8 Peaks. That's my bad. Carrick 8 Peaks over there. And you basically start anew. There might be incursions, there might be invasions of the vaults. You might lose one settlement, 2 settlements, maybe you lose all of the vaults. And you basically, regardless what you do, the chances are you'll be starting it all over from scratch at Carrick 8 Peaks. But you no longer have penalties, so practically speaking, you're at turn 40 to 50 playing as dwarves with a much more southern expansion. Now, if you do, and this is, although it sounds a bit cheesy or a bit silly, it actually makes a lot of sense on higher difficulties where you struggle with order, and so it can be hard to counteract the order and maintain control of your provinces. It makes a lot less sense on lower difficulties, in my opinion. If you're playing on hard, however, there's an alternative strat. That is the slow expansion strat. In that case, you expand. You take all of the vaults. You build up a decent stack, probably about a 10 stack with Belegar, just to hold things, and with alongside your ancestors. And you help Karak Norn crush Skarsnik, that way securing this flank. You attempt to confederate Karak Hearn, which will often be under pressure. By taking Karak Angzar, they might be under pressure from Wissenland or maybe some orcs. Try to confederate them. Always be on the lookout for a confederation with them. In my experience, Karak Norn doesn't want to confederate very often unless Skarsnik has crushed him entirely, and you don't really want that because you don't want to be dealing with Skarsnik. Fight off any crooked mutiniskets, fight off any beastmen, fortify, build up, make friends with Tilia and Tilia over here and the border princes. Get income from all of these, be friends with Wissenland. And once you're ready, probably around turn 40 or 50, just like with that rush strat, you push over, and you, instead of rushing straight to Karak Peaks, you take the Western Badlands, and you just take the whole province if you can, unless for some reason dwarves control Stone Mine Tower, or orcs maybe. You don't want to go to war with new factions. As Angrund, one of the key factors is not to go to war with anybody if you can avoid it. You want peace at all costs with as many people as possible until you take Karak Peaks. So don't start a war over a territory that you can't take, but do take the Western Badlands from whoever's got it. If you have to start a war, that's fine. That's one of the few situations where you do. And then from there, you have a springboard. You push east. You take Valia's Sorrow. You can take Crooked Fang Fort. You can take Drinko Rakaz if it's not under control of Karak Azul. And then you build some you build economy buildings, you build fortifications, you build army structures, and you keep an army sitting around the vaults, perhaps around Karak Hearn, ready to flex where it's needed, because you probably can't afford multiple armies, no more than one. And then you field about 2, maybe 3 armies, or probably no more than 2 armies really in the Badlands. Once you're ready, once you build up 2 stacks, probably locally with a mix of regiments of renown and regular units. You push into Karak Peaks. The garrison might be stronger. It might be like 14 and 20 or 16 and 20, but you should be able to win out. You might be able to even auto-resolve it depending on how well you built up. You can confederate with Karak Azul before that, sometimes if they've suffered enough, and that can definitely help you, because you'll be a strong enough faction for them to be willing to confederate with you. So you can confederate with them and try to get a boost to income. It's not really going to help you militarily because you can't afford the upkeep, and you shouldn't try to, but get a bit of a burst of income, and then take Karak Peaks. And once you take Karak Peaks, you're basically playing as dwarves with incomplete control of the Badlands and working from the south to the north. So you're basically playing as dwarves on a bit of a delay or a bit of a disadvantage with a weird starting spot, but it's not entirely bad. Your income will skyrocket the moment you take Karak Peaks because you get that 50% boost. You'll be able to start fielding more armies. Chances are that if you confederate Karak Azul, there's going to be a lot of uprisings, there's going to be a lot of insurrections, a lot of orc invasions for the remaining orc tribes that are still running around, and you will have to shut those down. And you can shut those down, you'll have to shut those down militarily. There's going to be a bunch of grudges, and there's going to be a period where you don't have too much control. But once you do, you'll have control of everything south of the Red River Valley, hopefully, including Death Pass, and you can then start pushing north. Don't start wars with the dwarves. Try to confederate them if you can. Confederate Zufbar if you can. Confederate Karak Norn if you can. Obviously, look for confederation opportunities at this stage. Basically, just playing as dwarves, except with rather than a demarcation line at Karazakarak, your demarcation line is a bit further south around Death Pass and between Death Pass, Western Badlands, and Red River Valley. So that's basically the early game for Clan Angrund. I'm going to be hopping on over to late game for a really quick discussion about some of the late game mechanics or some of the late game issues with Clan Angrund and that sort of stuff, and wrap up the video. So we're here in a bit of a late game situation, not quite the end game, and but very close. As you can see, I control most dwarf lands except the very north, Krakadrak. And basically this is a dwarf endgame. There's not much to say. I control most of the dwarf holds. My armies are pretty, for most part, fairly dwarvish. Those there are still, as you can see, some are still fairly light and good units, and I shuffled some rangers, like high quality rangers, out of Belagar's army into other armies that I had. So some of my armies are definitely lower tier than they would be otherwise, simply because I didn't quite have the tech ready when I wanted to, and then by the time I did, my armies were already out in the field, and global recruiting for dwarves is slow. But very quickly, gonna go cover some things for Belagar real quick, if I can find him. There we go. So as you can see, first and foremost, dwarf ancestors suffer a lot against chaos. Ambush is your friend. You want to ambush chaos if you can, and dwarf ancestors are pretty atrocious against chaos. Chaos tends to feel a lot of magic damage. They get magic damage from their hell cannons, and that will absolutely annihilate a lot of the dwarf ancestors very quickly, because their HP is absolutely pitiful. So they simply can't hold out against that sort of firepower. However, your rangers are absolutely obscene. As you can see here, if I scroll over Bugman's rangers, these used to be all generic rangers, and I replaced them with Bugmans and rangers with great weapons once I got the opportunity. But as you can see, the damage is over doubled on the rangers. The missile damage output over 100 on rangers with great weapons, and even Ulthar's raiders. If I zoom over Ulthar's raiders, if I can, I actually can't. Not in my territory, but Ulthar's Raiders only have 57 attack, so normally. So keep that in mind. This is 101. That's an absolutely obscene from the engineer, Belagar's tech, and some specific campaign tech. One of the techs I would definitely recommend is Vanguard proficiency, simply to make your rangers better. It makes them very survivable. It gives them a very respectable melee defense and amazing weapon damage. So you can just melt down everything. And as you can see, this is my early game start roster. I actually only scrapped the miners, and I never actually built new warriors, so you can even get by without that. I simply built up around rangers and used my heroes as front line. Over here, just going to hop on over to Carrick-Izor, just to the vaults, just to show what my early game setup was. Obviously now it's maxed out. I ended up building a Hall of Oaths for Iron Breakers and Hammerers and Thanes, and a Armory, of course, just to build those in Carrick-Izor. But as you can see, my early game, I actually built Brewmasters, or the Ale House, or the Ale Store, and walls early on, and built the Toolmakers Guild Hall as the tier 3. I would probably, in retrospect, recommend the Toolmakers Guild Hall if you're more experienced and more confident in your abilities. And as you can see here, money, walls in Zeraxil, and Rangers, and then walls, and then finally money in Carrick Buftar. But basically, exactly what I was describing: shipping the barracks out into Zeraxil, moving the rangers into Buftar, and building money and walls everywhere. Over here, you can see Western Badlands are still maxed out. This was a playthrough with the conventional strat. Western Badlands are basically just an economic powerhouse with no real military buildings. Eastern Badlands, because I was building some units on the spot there, some military buildings. Now, quickly, want to go over Carrick 8 Peaks and the unique structure there, which is the Reinforced Citadel, which levels up into the Ancestor Tombs, and it is a pretty atrocious, unique building. I'm not a fan. It does give you a reduction in vampiric corruption, which is respectable. A small garrison boost of Hammerers, which is okay. Hammers aren't bad in defense, but nothing crazy, given how expensive the building is. Public order boost, which is nice, but nothing amazing. Melee defense on siege, extra unit experience for infantry recruits, that's probably the most useful of the bunch. Everything else here is pretty pitiful. Magic weapons would be nice if you've really had issues with Savage Orcs at this stage of the game, but generally, as you take Carrick 8 Peaks and then quickly expand, you'll be fighting the Savage Orcs a bit too far out from Carrick 8 Peaks to really get value. Plus, this is a tier 5 upgrade and not tier 3, so you simply don't get. You'll usually have conquered everything by the time Carrick 8 Peaks hits tier 5. And you're almost never under siege at Carrick 8 Peaks. I don't think I've never, in a few different playthroughs or attempts, I've never had Carrick 8 Peaks be besieged by an enemy force, so it's a little strange. The defense bonuses are practically worthless. The only major benefits are the unit experience and reduction in corruption, in my opinion. So that is my take on Clan Angrund there. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. I do hope it helps you in beating what is probably the hardest campaign in the game. As you can see, I confederated a bunch of dwarves. So I have a lot of dwarf armies scattered all over the place. But yeah, I hope this helped you guys. And it helps you guys in beating what's probably the hardest campaign in the game. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like or subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any additional points you'd like to make, any questions you might have that I missed in the video, be sure to ask those down in the comments as well. I'll be sure to respond as soon as I can. I appreciate you all for watching, and Wyvern out.